I want to introduce myself. My name's Dusty May. I've lived in Port St. Joe for 57 years. I was born here back when that was allowed. And except for 4 years at UNC Chapel Hill, where I got a degree in chemistry, and for 4 years at University of Florida, where I got a doctorate in medical dentistry. I've been in Port St. Joe, and I've spent a lot of time out there and a lot of time up on the river swamp. And so, anyway, I'm not just some guy that thought this up. I've actually lived it, so for whatever that's worth. We're going to talk a lot today about a lot of things that have happened in our area. A lot of it I've seen in my lifetime, and I know some of you guys are a little older than I am, and y'all may have seen even more. But we're going to get into that. We're going to get into a lot of science, but we're going to try to make sure everybody understands what's going on as we go. And so if there's any point in time when I'm saying something that's confusing or you're not 100% sure what I just said, and probably a lot of other people didn't get it also. So before we get started, I want to thank some people. First and foremost, thanks Jeffrey Lenz for loaning us the Methodist Church. That's very generous. Judy Williams for volunteering to do the AV. Thanks, Miss Judy. We also have some elected officials here. Mayor Rex Bezette, thank you for coming. Scott Hoffman, Commissioner Scott Hoffman. I think I saw David. Yep, there's David Ashbrook's here. Thank you, David. We've got representative for one day, Jason Schoaf. Congratulations, Jason. We have Lisa Wiseman here, who is here for Representative Lorraine Osley. We have George Warthern, who's a regional director for FWC. Thanks, George, for making it. I'm probably missing somebody. If I am, please don't take it out on me. Have I missed anybody that's an elected official or representing an agency that I didn't get? Anyway, thank y'all for coming. Appreciate y'all being here. So what's BaySavers? Just real quick, show of hands. How many of you guys have seen our website? So about half. Okay, thanks. There might be a little review here for you, but there's a lot of new information too. So y'all hang in there with me. So I'm just going to read our goal. I mean, pretty simply, our goal is this: the primary focus of BaySavers is the restoration of Apalachicola Bay, St. Joseph Bay, and the Lake Wimico watershed that connects them to their pre-industrial state, before man connected the once pristine freshwater ecosystems of Lake Wimico and its 75,000-acre drainage basin to the saline environments of St. Joe Bay. So I just want to show you very quickly, if you'll look at this map, and I have a very low-tech pointer here, but my laser pointer doesn't work on that screen. I need to get a better laser pointer. But what we're trying to do is separate freshwater and saltwater. I had Dr. Stacy told me a pretty simple word here, and that is, just remember, fresh water is for oysters and salt water is for scallops. And you'll hear that again at the end of this message. So it's pretty simple, what we're trying to do. So looking at this screen, we have a drainage basin that roughly is 75,000 acres in area. All of this water drains into Lake Wimico. You've got Indian Bayou, you've got Depot Creek, you've got Huckleberry Creek, you've got Columbus Bayou, you've got Double Bayou, you got what's left of Searcy Creek. All of this water, historically, until 100 years ago, drained down into Lake Wimico, down the Jackson River, into the Apalachicola River, which is designated by blue here, and out into Apalachicola Bay. So 100 years ago, every drop of rain that fell in this basin would go to Apalachicola. 0 drops of that rain would come into St. Joe Bay. So the first thing we want to make sure we understand is that this watershed, until 100 years ago, was 100% fresh water. Well, there may have been some tidal influence, but it was all fresh. 100 years ago, the Corps engineers came in here and dug this ditch. This is the Intercoastal Waterway. It connects East Bay, which is up around St. Andrews Bay, the easternmost part of St. Andrews Bay. It connected East Bay to the Jackson River. The Jackson River is navigable. It's 20 feet deep and wide. Lake Wimico is shallow, 5 feet deep. So they dredged a channel from here all the way to here. Then they dredged out Searcy Creek, which is a real windy little creek. They dredged it out straight all the way up here to White City. And from White City, they basically just dug a ditch through the sand dunes all the way to East Bay. So when you talk about White City and the historical significance of Highway 71, 100 years ago, if you wanted to get to our area and you lived over here in Perry somewhere, you crossed the river here by ferry, or you had to skirt this entire body of water and go around Searcy Creek, which is why White City is there, and that's why Highway 71 is there. That's the way you had to come by land to get here. This is all water, all the way to the Gulf. So if you come from the other direction, you got the Overstreet Road. That's why it's there. You had St. Andrews Bay, East Bay. Well, that Overstreet Road skirts East Bay and allows you to get down to Mexico Beach. So that's why those two roads exist. That's the land bridge to our area. Everything else is water, both ways. So what we did is connect, the East Bay to this for industrial reasons, for commercial reasons. That was done early 1900s. In the 30s, Ed Ball wanted to get in on it. They just built the mill, so they decided to dig this ditch, which is from Port St. Joe up to the Intercoastal Canal. Now, from that point forward, St. Joe Bay became connected to the Apalachicola River floodplain. At that point, the Apalachicola River floodplain was the Chattahoochee River, which is the boundary between Alabama and Georgia, running pretty much the two-thirds of the way up the state. And it was the Flint River, which goes to Atlanta, and then it was Spring Creek, which is southwest Georgia. So basically all the water that drained from that area came down, met in that triangle, which is now called Lake Seminole, where Jim Woodruff Dam is, Chattahoochee. But back then there wasn't a dam. It all came down. It came down this floodplain right here, down the Apalachicola River, and went into the bay. If the river flooded, it came down that floodplain, backflowed into the Jackson River, filled up this entire drainage basin, and this was a storage reservoir, if you will, of fresh water that now, once the river dropped, it settled, filtered, and then fed that fresh water right back down the Jackson River into the Apalachicola Bay and Marsh. So that's the way this thing was designed. That's the way God built it, was for that to happen. So in 1936, we connected the bay to that ecosystem, St. Joe Bay. So now when it flooded and this backflowed into here, well, guess what? The water just came up there, came down this ditch, and went into St. Joe Bay. So we, in effect, it became a overflow valve, if you will, for any kind of high water event. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute about what these high water events, how we're quantifying them. So this has happened pretty much regularly since 1936. Now, in the late 40s, the Corps came in and said, we're gonna build a dam up here where the confluence of the Flint, the Chattahoochee, and Spring Creek are, and we're going to call it Jim Woodruff Dam, and we're going to make a lake called Lake Seminole, and that is going to be the headwaters for the Apalachicola River. So they built the dam, and in the agreement to build the dam, the whole reason they did it was to make the lower Apalachicola River navigable, so they could carry commerce up and down the river. They guaranteed the downstream people 9 feet of water, which was a navigable channel, and they maintained that channel from the late 40s, early 50s up till about 1990. Well, during that time, there were still flood events, and as it flooded, they had to let water out of the dam. The river got high. We're still dumping fresh water and sediment into St. Joe Bay every time the water gets high. But now they're maintaining it at 9 feet. So instead of it being just every once in a while, it's coming pretty regular now at 9 feet. Again, we're in the process of trying to quantify at what level does the river start to really flow into St. Joe Bay. We know it does during flood events. It's pretty obvious during actionable events, which are 13 to 17 feet. We really haven't quantified the lower levels yet. But we're going to get to that in just a second. So we've got this situation where every time there's high water, we're getting a massive amount of fresh water and the sediment that's in it in St. Joe Bay. So that continues up until, like I said, the late 80s, early 90s. At that time, when they built this dam, it was taking about 7,000 cubic feet per second of water to maintain 9 feet. By the late 80s, it was taking 13,000 cubic feet a second to maintain 9 feet. And you can read the article in there about the channel degradations and when they start straightening out river channels and whatnot. You get some big problems with river channels and it starts taking more water to maintain the same depth. Well, then they decided, well, we don't have a lot of water left because pivot irrigation was invented up in Georgia in the late 80s, and they started putting pivot irrigation in, and then Atlanta was getting bigger, and there's no more water, and Georgia's really starting to suck up all the water. We can't keep putting 13,000 cubic feet a second over the dam, so we're going to go dredge. So the Corps went in there and started dredging out the low areas of the river. Well, the counties got mad about that, and the environmentalists said, we don't like this dredging. So, they revoked their spoil permits. So the Corps wasn't allowed to put their spoil on the county land anymore. And the Corps finally said, we're washing our hands of navigation. We're done. We want out of the navigation business in this area. And that's kind of where they stand now. So they quit managing the river for navigation, and the river went back to its natural levels, flow levels. Well, up until that point, 9 feet kept a lot of fresh water in this area. And in fact, we don't know how much of it was coming out into St. Joe Bay, but we think probably some of it was. But it certainly wasn't allowing any salt water to come back in. So when I'm in high school and college, trying to run an outboard motor in this lake was very difficult. You had to stay in the channels and deep areas or you'd clog up your prop with grass. We used to winter 10,000 waterfowl in this lake right here. A lot of them were coots, but ducks, diving ducks, just all the animals that are migratory. We now winter none. There's some saltwater ducks up here, redheads, but the aquatic grasses in this lake are gone. Cypress trees are dying. They have tornado worms in them. All our buggy whips are gone. Coon grass, all the stuff that the ducks eat are not in this lake anymore. And Zach will tell you about that. I mean, we've seen it happen in the last 20 years. So what happened is when the Corps quit managing for 9 foot, all of a sudden, the river started going through these periods of real extreme low flow. And at low flow, you got a real low river over here. You get a high tide in St. Joe Bay or a west wind or, heaven forbid, a tropical storm or a tropical a storm surge, and you send a giant bolus of salt water right down this thing, killing all the grass here, and it's dumping it into the Apalachicola River. So what our contention is, and we still have to prove this with data, is that if you put a salinity meter a half a mile north of the pinhook and a half a mile south of the pinhook, you're going to see that the salinity down here is a lot higher than the salinity right there, because we feel like salinity in the low flow periods is coming right out of this lake. So we're dumping salt water now from St. Joe Bay into Apalachicola Bay. So that basically is the picture. What we have to do to prove it is we have to quantify these events. And like any other natural disaster, when the scientists start coming to you asking for data, you're like, I wish we'd have started collecting this 25 years ago, and then this would be easy, Now we're in a catastrophic situation, and yet everybody says we can't do anything until we got some numbers. So that's the challenge we have right now, is to develop the data we need to quantify this, so the powers that be will begin to believe that, hey, this is a real issue. So anyway, I rambled a little bit there, but give me a second to catch back up. So one of the things that we have done, and I'm gonna try this. Hang on, hope this works. Is we do have some data here in our website, and a lot of it is been collected by some of the research done by the Port Authority on getting ready to redredge our channel. And this is just a sample of some of the core samples that they've collected out of the bay. And if you've seen the website, then you know what's in there. There's an appendix in the website that's got a bunch of these pictures. A lot of these aren't necessarily, the core isn't necessarily that long. That's just how far they drill down. I mean, it could go on even further than that. And now we're not saying that every bit of that sediment came from the Apalachicola River in the last 80 years, but we are saying a lot of it did. So these suspended solids, this sediment, and I think a lot of us might be familiar with this sediment, that was what was on your floor after the hurricane. It wasn't sewage, and it was mud, river mud. That's what's out there on this bay, and it covers this bay floor, as far as you can see, from about Oak Grove to St. Joe Beach. Just a solid layer of mud on the bottom of this bay. Now above that is a layer of suspended solids. When I was in high school, when I was in college, we used to dive these range lights out here, the little towers that you see out in front of St. Joe Beach. You dive down, it's about 20, 25 feet deep. You dive down at clean sand bottom, you'd kill flounder. And version layer, and when you go into it, it's like a milkshake. And I don't even want to call it water. It's almost like I don't know what to call it, a suspended solid layer almost. And that's, so not only do we have sediment that you see here in this picture, we also have a layer of suspended solids on top of that sediment that are, I don't know how deep it is, but it's all over this entire bay. So a lot of what we're collecting, all the data we're collecting, is salinity data, which is great, but it's surface data. And there's been literally zero done to quantify or to even measure the amount of sedimentation that's taken place in the bay over the past 80 years. So that's what BaySavers is trying to do, is we're trying to quantify this problem to make it recognizable. So, So there's a couple of things here, too, that I want to go over. So we talked about low flow. I want to make it real clear here that BaySavers 100% believes that the cause of low flow is irresponsible upstream usage by the state of Georgia. So we support the state of Florida and their legal efforts. We support river keepers. We support all the environmental groups that are out there trying to make Georgia accountable for their water usage. So what we're doing, though, is pointing out what is happening as a result of that low flow. So I just want to make sure that some people are like, well, are you saying, that all this other stuff's wrong? No. We're saying it's right. We're saying actually because of that, this reverse flow, this saltwater intrusion going into Apalachicola Bay from St. Joe Bay has happened. So we got some other issues too. I think no matter where you stand on environment or climate change, you go down to Key West and you talk to some of the people that have lived down there their whole life, and they'll tell you that the sea level is higher than it was 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, and these are not environmentalists. These are just people that live there. So whether you believe sea level rise is occurring or not, most people that live very close to the water believe it is happening and will continue to happen. So we see that this event is not just what it is now, it's only going to get worse as far as salt water going the other way. The other thing we know is that our drinking water actually crosses the Intercoastal Canal just north of White City. And so it's an open canal system that goes under the canal via pipe. So if you live in Port St. Joe, that's where you get your drinking water, from the Chipola River. And so, again, when we start talking about the solution to this problem, we think that it'll also protect our drinking water, which is at some point probably going to become an issue. So let's talk a little bit about Lake Wimico now. Show of hands, how many people have been to Lake Wimico? God, a lot of people. Okay, good. So, Lake Wimico has no road access, and there's not a residence on it. So it's a 17,000-acre body of water that has literally no access to it. But it's critical, even in its own right, that we save this ecosystem, and it's also super valuable for the freshwater collection going into Apalachicola Bay. So I want to make sure right now that everybody in this room understands how the water flows and high water from the Apalachicola River floodplain and then the low water from St. Joe Bay. Does everybody kind of get what I'm talking about as far as that's concerned? Okay, good. Because that's basically, in effect, what we're talking about here. So, what do we do about this? Let me find out what we do about it. It's in here somewhere. Here it is. Okay. So let me just summarize. In the past 75 years, St. Joe Bay has siphoned off massive amounts of sediment and fresh water from Apalachicola Bay. And for the past 30 years, we've dumped high salinity water into Apalachicola Bay. The good news, though, is that we have a solution. And this solution is not complicated. It's not difficult. It is expensive. And it's pretty simply building a lock or a dam, but preferably a lock, right here where you can see this proposed lock site. So, somewhere south of the T, either north or south of White City, we'd like to see a lock built. That's what our primary objective is. If we could interrupt that flow of water right there, we could set the clock back 100 years. Literally, at that point, we're back to before we ever dug the Intercoastal Canal. And if we could do that, then this ecosystem would heal itself, because that fresh water is the problem in this bay. Now, the reverse issue of saltwater intrusion going the way of Apalachicola Bay is not their number one problem. Apalachicola Bay's number one problem is low flow coming from Georgia. But it is a substantial part of their problem. Our calculations show, and we've got some great new calculations, by the way, Larry, I got to show them to you. From Deborah Mays is not here, but she's done a great job of quantifying these river flows. We got some great data that's showing just how much water. I lost my train of thought. Just how much water is going both ways, and she's tied it into the river levels. But I won't get to that in just a second. So anyway, if we can build a dam or a lock there, it would solve St. Joe Bay. We feel, BaySavers feels, it would solve St. Joe Bay's problem. We would stop the flow of sediment coming into this bay, and we would begin the process of flushing what's here out. Now, how long is it going to take to flush it out? I don't know. Probably a while. But if we quit dumping it in there, I really feel like we'd start seeing some progress very quickly. And it wouldn't just be the bay. It would be St. Joe Beach and Mexico Beach. Anybody that lives at St. Joe Beach, Mexico Beach knows that water it's not clear anymore. I was watching home videos the other day. They're my kids 20 years ago. I couldn't believe the water in St. Joe Beach, how clear it was. It was like October of 1995, whatever it was, Carl. I remember that. I was like, wow. You know, it just changes a little bit every year, and you don't really see it. And you go back and look at something 20 years ago, and you're like, man, it never gets this clear anymore. And so what we would see is this clarity improve, not just in the bay, but also all the way down the beach. So it would be good for our economy. I mean, property values go up with clear water, and so there's no downside to this. Anyway, we stop that flow of fresh water with a lock or a dam, lock preferably. Our calculations. This was my train of thought. Sorry about that. Our calculations show that basically at a 20-foot river, we are siphoning off about 14% of the total river flow from coming over crossing the flow meters in Bluntstown. So to my friends in Franklin County, I say this: if they don't think it's a problem, if somebody was cutting 15% of your income every time it rained, and then when it didn't rain, they were sending you garbage, you'd probably be upset about it. And right now, that's what we're doing. I mean, we're siphoning off 15% of their water during high flow events, and during the low flow events, we're sending them salt water. And so it is an issue. It's not the overriding issue in Apalachicola Bay, but it is an issue. It is the overriding issue here, however. I'm wrapping this thing up. Locks. I mean, what's the deal with a lock? Well, the Corps manages 241 locks and 195 sites across the United States. So the Corps knows how to build locks, they know how to manage locks. They just have to have the political direction to do it, and because they're expensive to build, and they're somewhat expensive to maintain, but it's a known entity. The technology is there, and we feel like this lock anyway, if we chose, could be a little smaller, a little narrower, and still, because there's no commercial traffic going south. You could do that, but if you did that, you would not be addressing any salt water that came into the system or fresh water that was leaving the system going into East Bay. Our feeling on putting the lock there is simply that that's what will keep the water in the Lake Wimico drainage basin. So that would be, now if we're only talking about saving St. Joe Bay and we didn't care about Apalachicola Bay, and we didn't have any commercial option, commercial people that didn't want us to do it, you could dam up that Highlandview Canal, but, and it may come to that, who knows. But our primary goal is to get that lock built where it's going to save that drainage basin for Apalachicola Bay and keep the fresh water out of St. Joe Bay. And to be quite frank with you, the other reason we did it is there's a lot of commercial interest in East Bay right now. I mean, Eastern Shipbuilding and St. Joe and that connection, and we thought it would be politically expedient as well if we could keep that channel open. So that's the answer. I don't know if it's a good one, but that is the answer. Yeah. So she's saying NOAA predicts a 1 foot sea rise by 2050, and will this help protect that? And absolutely, that's what we're talking about. So, like Dr. Stacy said, salt water for scallops, fresh water for oysters. I mean, we've got to separate the saltwater side and the freshwater side. And this isn't experimental or innovative, y'all. We're putting it back like it was 100 years ago. It's as simple as that. I mean, we're just putting it back the way it was. We're not making anything up here. We're just putting it back the way it was. There's never been a connection between St. Joe Bay and Lake Wimico or the Apalachicola River floodplain until 100 years ago. I mean, so this isn't rocket science. Mike. Right. Yeah. Yep. Not going south, there's not. There really isn't any commercial traffic going south at the T. I mean, there may be an occasional, I don't know, tugboat, but the problem is the Corps hadn't dredged Lake Wimico in 20 years. And so the channel in Lake Wimico right now is degraded greatly. So I'm not aware of there being any commercial traffic. Now, there's commercial traffic between St. Joe and East Bay, but I'm not aware of any commercial traffic at this point going to Apalachicola on the intercoastal. Commercial meaning barge traffic, tugboats, shrimp boats, and recreational vessels there are. They don't even want to go through there anymore, do they? I know that I was talking to Captain Bill out here that owned the Fishing Express, and in the hurricane, they had a boat run aground in that channel, and that's why he couldn't get his boat down to the Apalachicola River, and a bunch of those guys went up to Weetapo Creek, which they'd never done before, but did okay, but they were in unexplored territory, and it was all because of somebody ran aground in that lake channel right before the hurricane trying to get their boat out of here. So, and Dewey, that I don't blame, yeah. So what he said, did y'all hear what he said? That sports fishing boats like these 30, 40 foot, like marlin, the boats you see that go fishing that have inboard diesels, they're not using the canal right there through the Lake Wimico right now. That channel is unsafe for them. So, yeah. Well, I mean, like you said about the hurricane, Gary brought up to me the other day, Gary's with the port, and they've done measurements. Gary, the hurricane basically sucked out about 2 feet of that mud. Is that correct? 2 to 4 feet of it, because they're measuring how much they're going to have to dredge, and now they're not going to have to spend as much money to dredge because a lot of it's gone. Well, a lot of it ended up in your house, and then a lot of it ended up going out that way. So to answer your question, we don't know the answer to that. What we believe, and I believe just as being in nature my whole life, is that, and I'm going to get to this issue in a little different way in a minute, is that if you give this ecosystem just a tiny little bit of a break, you're going to see a lot of improvement. And it doesn't really take a lot of a break a lot of times, just a little bit. Jason.
Is there another example anywhere in our country where a man-made canal has had this kind of impact? And if so, what was their solution?
Well, that's a good question. Go ahead.
Indian River in Titusville and that area, and the Banana River, when they built hollow canal between Mosquito Lagoon to the Indian River, that created a lot of reverse flow, and one of their solutions to stop the flow and make that back more of a lagoon type thing was to put a lock at Fort Canaveral, keep the Indian River from flowing out to Fort Canaveral, kind of what we're supposed to do.
So on the website, there's actually a pretty cool YouTube video of a boat going through the Cape Canaveral locks. So yeah, in Louisiana, Mississippi, the rice farmers have gotten enough political clout over there. They've put locks on several waterways over there to keep salt water out of their rice fields. Anyway, it's pretty interesting when you start researching locks. There's a lot of locks out there. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So what we think, we know how the current runs in this bay. I mean, it comes in around the tip of the point. We had to prove this to build the marina. It comes in around the tip of the point, goes up, and then goes back out towards Mexico Beach. So the flushing effect is that way. We know that. So to answer your question, we don't really know, but certainly our hopes and expectations, and I think from past experience, at least the suspended solids to start with would disappear. The actual sludge itself, we'd probably have to peel that off over the years. You know what I mean? That's just my guess. I'm not a hydrologist or a specialist in that. But it's a good question, and certainly we think that healing process needs to begin ASAP. Anything else? Anybody else? So, moving right along. So the Corps manages a bunch of locks. They know how to build them. They're kind of expensive to build, but the Corps basically performs at the will of our elected officials. And if it becomes politically expedient for them to build a lock, and they're instructed to build a lock, they'll build a lock and they'll maintain a lock. But it's as simple as that. There's some research out there that shows how much of a percentage they will actually help in certain situations. A study just done by Texas A&M last year, matter of fact, kind of shows that the Corps takes on different percentages of ownership and management based on the need for the lock. It's still a lot of money. We do have, BaySavers has 2 projects in the Restore Act, the BP Restore Act portal, and one of those projects is for lock construction. We also had an interesting meeting with the county this morning, and they're interested in trying to help, develop some other pots of money that won't come out of their pocket, but may be available for environmental uses in our county. So, is the money there? I don't know, but we won't ever know unless we ask for it. So that's kind of the way we're going. And the way we got to make this thing work is it's got to become a political issue for everybody, and it's got to become a big enough political issue to where something gets done. We do have a governor that ran on clean water. We've got environmental disasters that are water-based happening all over the state between Red Tide and Lake Okeechobee, and if we could make sure that people understand that what we're trying to do is avert one of those here, then maybe we can get somebody's attention. So talk about a little bit about healing. So 15 years ago, Hurricane Katrina hit the eastern half of the peninsula that runs down south of Louisiana, basically where Venice, Louisiana, most of y'all know where that is. And so the eastern half of that peninsula was devastated. And about 100 years ago, the Corps of Engineers channelized the Mississippi River there, and they built levees down both sides of that river to maintain a deep channel. And Katrina wiped out the east levee of the Mississippi River. So some of you guys know me. I do a lot of waterfowl hunting. I've been going out to Louisiana hunting, and we've been hunting with a Cajun out there that's an interesting guy. And his family owned about 10,000 acres of that marsh on the eastern side of the levee down in that part of Louisiana. And he told me that 10, 12 years ago that they never saw a duck or any waterfowl on any of his property. They only got shrimp and fish. They basically, if you've ever been down there, they shrimp in real shallow water. He now runs a duck hunting operation on that property, and he said that ever since that fresh water started coming across that levee, that the native grasses started growing back in all of his marshes and all that, and they're now 10,000 to 15,000 gadwalls wintering on his property every time I've been down there. So, and 10 years ago, he said they never saw a duck in this marsh. It was all salt. Now this fresh water has created this giant resurgence, and it's been dormant for 100 years, and it's coming back. So the earth does have some amazing capacity to heal if you'll just give it a little chance, or we feel like that it does. So a minute ago we talked a little bit about calculations. We've had some coming and going about these calculations, but I think it's important to get these numbers out there. Flow is not a difficult thing to measure. It's a difficult thing to get perfect, but it's not a difficult. I mean, the Romans have been measuring flow for 2,000 years ago. They figured out flow in these aqueducts. You basically measure how long it takes an object, submerged object, to go from point A to point B. You get a cross-sectional diagram of that channel, and you come up with a cubic feet per second of flow, of how fast water is moving. I did some rudimentary calculations on January 1st, 2019 in the Intercoastal Canal. I basically used Google Earth to measure the width. I used my depth finder to measure the depth. Subtracted 20% from both just to be conservative, and still came up with, at a 20-foot river, we were losing over 5 billion gallons of water every 24 hours. So if you want to go on the website and check my math, please do. It's on there. But that's billion with a B, gallons. How much sediment is in that water? I don't know. If you build a dam or a lock, the Department of Interior makes you use a number that's high. So if we use that number, and I hope it's high, we're talking about over 8 million tons of sediment every 24 hours. 8 million tons. So if that's 50% off, that's 4 million tons. If that's 90% wrong, that's 1 million tons. So how much more than zero do you need before you start taking action? Because it's supposed to be 0 tons. So it's supposed to be 0 gallons of water. So it's critical that we get this data. It's just, we have to have it. We got to get these meters in there. We have to get the right scientists and the right groups of people to come in here and get this data. But for people to tell us that there's not a problem because they don't have the numbers gets my goat a little bit, because it's supposed to be 0. Before I move on to the last little part here, I want to thank a couple people in BaySavers. If you would stand up, Mark Howes. Mark's been working really hard on this. Thank you, Mark. Mark is the CCA rep here in Port St. Joe. So if you have any questions about CCA or fishing, talk to him. Dewey Blaylock. Dewey's helped a bunch. Thank you, Dewey. Dewey's a marine biologist and a previous restaurant owner. Dave Russell. Dave basically organized this event. Thank you, Dave. Deborah Mays is not here tonight. She is the person who's come up with a lot of this river data that is really going to make a huge difference in what we can present. I haven't forgot you. Okay, what's that? Okay. Well, it's according to where you put it, but what we anticipate is there being a boat launch on either side of that lock. Typically, the Corps does a pretty good job of developing their properties into recreational facilities, and so we feel like with a little bit of county involvement, we could get a boat ramp put on on the side other than the one that's already existing. So, go ahead, Dewey. It's a lock. It opens, right. I mean, you are supposed to be able to take a boat through it. So, where am I here? Okay. Deborah Mays, Larry Wagner. Thank you, Larry, for all you've done. Larry's a marine engineer. And last but certainly not least, he's not here tonight, Jack Kerrigan, who developed and built this website for free. So, I also want to remind you that this is not just an informational meeting. We need you to join BaySavers. We need you to go on the website, read it, and then click Join Us and give us your information. We need a big, broad grassroots to make this thing move forward. Also, we have a Facebook page that Mark generated for us. Go to BaySavers Florida and like us. So that page just got put up yesterday, didn't it, Mark? Yeah. So thank y'all. Okay, we need people. I mean, please share this with as many people as you can. We need grant writers, public speakers, lobbyists, accountants, researchers, field workers. I mean, if you really want to do something about our environment, join our group. That's just as simple as that. So I'm going to summarize real quick. We're going to wrap this thing up. We can turn back the clock 100 years pretty simply, but it will cost money, and it has to be politically important to enough people for their representatives to take this to Congress and get it done. The technology's there. This isn't complicated. We got a seller-ready project. We don't have to go talk people into selling us land. So this can happen, but only with the political pressure. This is not innovative. We're not doing something experimental here. We just want to return our ecosystems to the way we know they were 100 years ago. There's not an environmentalist out there that can tell you that using Mother Nature as a barometer is a bad thing. Put it back the way it was. Put it back the way it was for thousands of years. It's pretty simple. Studies and data will be needed, and we will provide them. But returning these ecosystems to the way we know they were before we dredge these canals should not take years of double-blind studies to determine if it needs to be done. We know that St. Joe Bay is stealing massive amounts of fresh water and sediment from Apalachicola Bay. We know that fresh water and sediment do not belong in St. Joe Bay, and that sediment is accumulating in St. Joe Bay and causing catastrophic damage here. We know that salinity increases in Apalachicola Bay are causing catastrophic damage there, and we contend that St. Joe Bay is contributing to that salinity increase. We know that Lake Wimico and its drainage basin is historically a freshwater ecosystem that collects, stores, and filters fresh water that drains into the Apalachicola River and Bay via the Jackson River. These separate ecosystems functioned this way for thousands of years until we dredged the canals that artificially connected them. We know that Lake Wimico has now transformed from a rich freshwater ecosystem into a much more saline environment. We contend that this saline water is entering Apalachicola Bay from the north, the Lake Wimico end, as well as from the bay itself, increasing salinity even more. We want and need studies done to develop data on these critical issues. This data is essential to getting the funding we need to complete this project. Having said that, we all know the story of Nero fiddling while Rome burned. Conducting studies on the flammability of Roman building materials while the city burns is not research, it's negligence. And we are fiddling, people. The city is burning.